This is a tough one to read, I'll be honest with you. I feel like Benedict and Beatrice, even though there's this war of the sexes going on, and really patriarchy is the rule of the day, at least we get people who genuinely love each other. There's something like this third way of reconciliation given to us. This play, though, dang, it's bad news all the way through. So, what's the plot? Hortensio, young guy, not super rich, not very attractive, and Gremio, old guy, very rich, kind of a creep, are both trying to marry Bianca. Young, good-looking gal, lots of money, but Bianca's dad, Baptista, says he won't give Bianca a marriage until her older, meaner sister, Katerina, gets married. Why? Because reasons. We don't really know why. It's fitting in the world of play to say that Baptista is using his daughter's marriage as a financial scheme. He's real big on dowries, and it's unlikely Kate will pull in the big bucks, so he's using Bianca as a kind of bait. It's really a Jacob Laban type situation, if you catch my drift. So meanwhile, Lucentio washes up on shore with his servant Tranio and falls in love with Bianca instantly, like you do, and decides to go undercover as a Latin tutor named Cambio, just to get closer to her, like normal people who are in love. So while we're at it, we might as well make Tranio dress up like Lucentio and try to dupe Baptista into a marriage agreement. It's all a con. See, Lucentio can't just run off with Bianca. He needs legal standing, even if that's not honestly come by. Meanwhile, Gremio and Hortensio hatch a scheme to get Kate out of the way. Gremio's scummy buddy Petruccio will do anything for money, and he hears that marrying Kate comes with a sweet promise of cash and land from Daddy Baptista. And for his part, Gremio and Hortensio are so horny for Bianca they're willing to pay whatever it costs Petruccio to woo Kate. But Kate's not going for it, see? She's not interested in this swaggering buffoon Petruccio. But Petruccio literally won't take no for an answer. That's why they got this guy. He marries her and then spends the rest of the play trying to persuade her that she loves him. Meanwhile, Tranio as Lucentio makes an absurd offer as dowry for Bianca, outbids Gremio and Hortensio. It's a lie, by the way, he doesn't have that kind of cash. And Baptista agrees as long as Lucentio's father confirms the deal. Hey, in case you die before marriage, Lucentio, I need to get my money. And wouldn't you know it, but Tranio Lucentio bumps into a traveling salesman that owes him a solid and agrees to dress up like Vicentio, Lucentio's father. So while Lucentio Cambio woos and wins Bianca, Tranio Lucentio and salesman Vicentio arrange everything with Baptista. It's all going great until the real Vicentio shows up and nearly upends everything. But just about when things are about to get ugly, Lucentio Cambio, now officially married to Bianca, comes clean. Turns out Baptista's fine with it as long as he gets paid. Hortensio hooks up with a rich widow, and Gremio, well, Gremio gets no one, but gets to have dinner, so net win. It's all a bit much, honestly. The thing that really stays with us in this play, though, is the Petruccio-Katerina dynamic. This is like an unfunny version of the merry war Benedict and Beatrice go through, but there's nothing really merry about it. At every turn, he insists that she loves him, and at every turn, she tells him that she doesn't. His goal is to kill her with kindness, to cure her of her willfulness, and turn her into the ideal submissive wife. That's really just a socially acceptable way of saying abuse. He abuses her, he starves her, freezes her, lies to her, gaslights her, manipulates her, and for a while she resists him. For a while. But then at the end, all the nobles are happy and feasting, and Petruccio makes a bet that his wife is more submissive and obedient than all the others. Here's the shtick. Every man calls his wife to him. The first to arrive is the most submissive and dedicated to her lord and master husband. But the wives refuse to come when called. All except for Katerina, to the surprise of literally everyone. Katerina comes on stage, calls the other women over to her, and gives them a speech about being a good wife, and gosh, it's just soul-crushing. She's been completely brainwashed, subdued, tamed. We're not the first to feel uncomfortable with the resolution of this play. In 1610, John Fletcher, one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, even one of his co-authors for some plays, wrote an unofficial sequel to this play called The Woman's Prize, or The Tamer Tamed, in which Kate has died, no doubt due to a life of horrendous abuse, and Petruccio is wooing a new woman, Maria. But Maria takes that dude down a peg. The tables are turned and Petruccio gets his. All that is to say, early modern audiences weren't of one mind on the ways domestic partnerships between husband and wife should work. The real question we need to figure out is how to situate this play in that debate. What is the role of a woman in marriage, in society, in partnership? There are some critics who read the end of this play ironically. That's just to say they'll imply that Kate is in on the gag with Petruccio to con the other nobles out of their money. Her dialogue at the end, these folks say, should be read with a wink and a nod between Katerina and Petruccio. Just as a note, this is totally the way most 20th century adaptations play it, and maybe that's the way it must be played in the 20th century. Frankly, I don't see anything in the text to support that reading. It really depends on slipping in between the lines and hoping for the best. So Harold Bloom, for example, somewhat ridiculously claims that Petruccio and Catherine's ending is, quote, a kind of shared conspiracy against the rest of us. Petruccio gets to swagger, and Kate will rule him and the household, perpetually acting her role as reformed shrew. He continues, though you have to read carefully to see it, Petruccio is accurate when he insists Kate fell in love with him at first sight. How could she not? The swaggering Petruccio provokes a double reaction in her, outwardly furious, inwardly smitten. Wah! If it wasn't so pernicious, I'd call it wishful thinking. Bloom's incel reading aside, maybe more convincingly, other critics read the reconciliation of the play as a demonstration of the noble woman's proper place. To be happy, you need to submit to your husband, abuse your slaves, and most importantly of all, chide other women. Francis Dolan, for example, sees in the play an example of the process by which early modern culture attempted to distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable forms, targets, and occasions of violence in the household. So in true patriarchal form, violence trickles down the great chain of being, from man to woman to commoner to slave. The real problem with Kate is not that she's arrogant and abusive, it's that she's arrogant and abusive toward the wrong people. Men. The restoration the comedy seeks to bring about is just really putting Kate in her proper place, abusing the right people. That's pretty hard to square, if you ask me. I mean, I think there's something to the idea that what makes us uncomfortable with this play is that patriarchal violence is so shamefully effective. Petruccio is an abusive, controlling jerk, and he's respected not in spite of that, but for it. Kate, on the other hand, is also not a person we can sympathize with. She physically abuses her sister, she bullies her servants, she manipulates the people around her to gain power and mastery over them. She's not a good person. The most we can really muster for her is pity, because she gets abused. This is a hard play to read because however unlikable Kate is, I don't think anyone would say that starving her, manipulating her, breaking her is in any way tolerable or something we should passively accept. As modern readers, with modern eyes, we look at this play and see the gaslighting, the manipulation, the lies, the physical abuse, and think, how could anyone enjoy this? But, you know, when we get the historical context in view, it's actually much, much worse. One of the things we don't catch is the subtext of husband-wife domestic relationships at the time, and the ways that wives were taught to be subservient to their husbands. So that speech Katerina gives at the end of the play, all the other women are there. There are some clues in here. She says, I am ashamed that women are so simple. To offer war, we should kneel for peace. To seek for rule, supremacy, and sway when they are bound to serve, love, and obey. This might sound familiar if you've been to a traditional wedding, to love, honor, and obey till death do us part. That's actually how the English Book of Common Prayer phrases it, which would have been the rubric during Shakespeare's time. That bit Katerina says that they should kneel for peace, there's actually a point in this traditional ceremony where the woman literally kneels in front of her husband. Even way after this kind of thing was acceptable, brides would still fake this part of the ceremony by pretending to drop the ring and then kneel down to pick it up. But there's something off here. The language isn't exactly right. In fact, the language is actually closer to an older marriage ritual from a Catholic liturgy called the Rite of Sarum. This older liturgy is one of the main influences that would later be brought into the Protestant Church of England. Importantly, and I'm indebted to a scholar named Linda Boose who uncovered all this stuff in the 90s. You can read her whole article linked on the additional resources section for this play on Moodle. There's a bit right at the end of Kate's speech where she advises the wives to place your hand below your husband's foot. This had totally vexed readers for a long time, until we found the same line in the Rite of Sarum. But this was an outdated ritual in Shakespeare's time by a good 50 years. Still, it had been sublated into the new approved rituals of the state church. It's almost like Kate is calling back to that older form as more ideal. Kind of like that's supposed to be the good old world we should try to get back to. But it's worse than that. The service and obedience a woman owed her husband were matched by the methods used to keep her subdued. In the play, there's a tremendous amount of attention paid to putting Kate's tongue in check. To tame the shrew, Petruccio must tame her speech. This shutting down of Kate's ability to speak her own words for herself, Boose points out, is connected to a particular archaic practice called bridling. A woman with too sharp a tongue, one that refused to kneel and put her hand on her husband's foot, might find herself forced to wear a piece of iron headgear called the Scold's bridle. Scold, by the way, is another term for shrew. Hortensio tells Petruccio that Katerina is renowned in Padua for her scolding tongue. A few lines later, Petruccio refers to as an irksome, brawling scold. The Scold's bridle was a kind of big iron mask with a padlock on the side and really grotesquely distorted features. Sometimes there was a bell on top to call more attention to the woman and therefore greater shame. More than that, there was a sharp metal spike that would stick into the woman's mouth to physically pin her tongue down. We have a number of these devices in museum collections, and it was a well-known practice. There are contemporary accounts of women being publicly shamed, forced to wear these devices. One of them, from 1655, describes the Scold's bridle as, quote, a crown of iron, which was muzzled over the head and face, with a great tongue of iron forced into her mouth, which forced the blood out. This text also points out this punishment was inflicted upon chiding and scolding women, and one that was often seen done. While this kind of violence against women wasn't exactly commonplace, it was something that flew under the law, kind of a sublegal right a man had over his property, namely his wife. It's certainly something that Shakespeare's audience would have called to mind watching this play. Even though there's no explicit bridling scene in this play, how could there be? That would be a bridge too far in this comic world. Having that historical context makes us see the taming of this shrew in a very different light. There's something else here too, though. The danger of representation in literature is that the reader, or viewer, is always implicated in the world presented to us. Inviting readers to sympathize with the main characters or having us laugh at the absurd or raucous jokes subtly smuggles in our tacit acceptance of the world the text presents, even with all its ugliness. Remember last week we talked about the inherent voyeurism of drama and film. If the visual medium implicates us as peeping toms, then the written medium makes us think in the voice of another person, and not necessarily a good person. Now, when I say reader here, I don't necessarily mean you, gentle viewers of this video. I mean more the ideal reader of this text, the audience for whom the text imagines itself performing. Another way to say that is that this text expects its audience to accept or even enjoy the patriarchal violence, casual misogyny, and outright abuse as part of the comic scheme about the appropriate order of the world. So Linda Boose puts it this way. As Kate being gentled and manipulated to enter the feminine enclosure of the sex and gender system, the audience is also being strategically manipulated to applaud her for embracing that fate. By dramatizing Kate's resignation as her joyous acceptance of a world to which we recognize no alternatives exist, Shakespeare reinscribes the comfortingly familiar order inside a dialogue that challenges the social disruptions of power, but concludes in a formula that invites us to applaud the reinstatement of the status quo. Now, this sounds very uncomedic. In fact, an earlier generation of Shakespeare scholars classified this text as a problem play because, as they saw it, it doesn't really fit into any kind of tiny resolution that a comic world would have. There's no proper dialectic movement, no synthesis graduating into the better world the comedy promises. So what do we do with this play? I want to make the startling claim that this play is in fact a comedy. I also want to say that we have very good reason to reject the resolution we see in Act 5 with Petruccio and Katerina. Here's why. Christopher Sly. Remember, this play doesn't start with Act 1. Instead, we get this other strange framing narrative, the Induction. You remember this. Christopher Sly, drunken traveling handyman trying to treat a prostitute, gets duped by a bully lord and his complicit lackeys into thinking he's a noble himself. Then a group of players is brought in to perform for him, and wouldn't you know it, the taming of the shrew begins. That means that this play was actually a play within a play the whole time. Chris Sly and his pretend boy wife are right there watching all along. The audience can see them. And in case we forget about them, dude blurts out some nonsense at the end of Act 1 just to remind us he's still there. Now note the term here. This is the induction, not the introduction, not the preface, induction. The verb here would be to induce, and it carries overtones of causation, bringing something about. It's not just this silly little moment in the play, rather it's what makes the play possible. It brings it into being. It frames the whole thing we're about to watch as part of a rich man's ploy to dupe an idiot whoremonger. If you're looking for the text's ideal reader, look no further than Christopher Sly. This would mean that rather than thinking this play passively repeats those violent, misogynistic tropes, we might say this play, or rather this play within a play, establishes an ironic critique of those ideas. They aren't the things the play endorses, but a disrobing of the games people in power play against those without it, to pit men and women against each other in a fight to the mutual death. This is an old and dirty trick. If you want to keep people in chains, make them fight each other. You'll be so busy trying to keep each other down, you won't even notice the ruling class that sits up above the stage, watching and laughing. But this is why, also, equality and inclusivity are radically revolutionary acts and a legitimate threat to all oppressors. And that's why, too, the play doesn't return to Christopher Sly at the end. The point of that induction is to remind us the world of the play is a fiction. It's not real. It's make-believe, and we should be suspicious of any promises it makes us. In fact, watching the curtain drop on Katerina and Petruccio, we take one step back and see Christopher Sly and the deceiving lord and his men and wait, too, for that curtain to drop. And it's at that moment, the moment when the play smacks us with evidence of its own fictionality, that we should turn and see the great curtain that hangs behind us, all the world a stage and men and women players playing parts scripted for us, and ask ourselves the final comic question: where is the reconciliation? What is my action in this play outside the play that will induce a new and better world? If we let all the reconciliation happen on the stage, we'll never live the better world the comedy promises is possible. No, we have to tear resolution off the stage, drag it out of the theater and into the streets. If it's ever going to work, it's got to be more than feel-good make-believe. I hope you were unsatisfied by this play. I hope it left you feeling disappointed, and more than that, I hope you've been disappointed enough to make that final leap from voyeur to actor, to go in search of the reconciliation the play will never deliver.